In a quiet suburban study, an estate lawyer was about to uncover a devastating family secret. What started as routine inventory took a shocking turn when she discovered a hidden safe behind a false wall. Samantha Taylor wasn't your typical grieving daughter. For 15 years, she had built her life on truth and justice through law, known for her methodical pursuit of facts. When she found CIA documents proving her father faked his death, she had no idea she was walking into a deadly conspiracy. Samantha's investigation would lead to a dangerous game with government operatives. What began as settling an estate would become a fight for survival against her family's killers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The key turned with the same stubborn resistance Samantha remembered from childhood. A half-twist left, then right, then the final push that made the lock surrender with its familiar click. 28 years old, and she still approached her father's front door like the 13-year-old girl who'd lived here before the world fell apart. The house smelled of old coffee and forgotten newspapers, underlaid with the faint scent of her father's cologne that seemed to have soaked into the very walls. Samantha set her briefcase down in the entryway, her lawyer's instincts already cataloging the work ahead. Robert Taylor's estate wasn't complex. A modest suburban home, a small savings account, and the debris of a quiet life spent keeping books for local businesses. Simple, manageable, everything her father had been. She moved through the rooms methodically, clipboard in hand, noting items for donation, sale, or disposal. The living room held the same furniture she remembered: the brown leather recliner where her father had read his evening paper, the coffee table with its familiar ring stains, the bookshelf lined with accounting texts and mystery novels. Everything exactly as she'd left it 15 years ago, preserved like a shrine to normalcy. But it was in the kitchen that the memories hit hardest. The round table where they'd eaten breakfast together on weekend mornings, her father patient with her teenage complaints about school and boys and the unfairness of having to do chores. He'd made pancakes shaped like animals, terrible misshapen creatures that had made her laugh despite herself. Those Sunday mornings had been the closest thing to magic in her carefully ordered world. Before Mom died. Before everything changed. Samantha forced herself to continue working, her pen scratching against the clipboard as she inventoried dishes that would never hold another family meal. The grief counselor had warned her about this, how settling a parent's estate could resurrect emotions she thought she'd processed. But knowing something intellectually and living it were two different things entirely. The study called to her last, though she'd been avoiding it all afternoon. Robert Taylor's inner sanctum, where he'd spent countless evenings hunched over client files and tax returns, where he'd taught her the value of precision, of double-checking figures, of building a life on reliable foundations. The room felt smaller than she remembered, cramped with file cabinets and an oversized desk that dominated the space. Samantha began with the obvious, pulling papers from drawers, sorting through decades of careful record-keeping. Her father had been meticulous, every receipt filed, every document labeled and dated. It was comforting, this evidence of his methodical nature, so much like her own approach to life. She was measuring the room for the estate appraiser when something struck her as wrong. The numbers didn't add up. Samantha paced the length of the study, counting steps, then did the same from the hallway outside. 12 feet inside, 14 feet outside. She checked again, certain she'd made an error. But the measurement held. 2 feet of space existed somewhere that shouldn't. Her pulse quickened as she examined the wall more carefully. The wood paneling looked seamless, but when she pressed against it near the corner, she felt a slight give. She ran her fingers along the edges, searching for something her conscious mind couldn't yet name. There, a section of molding that sat just slightly proud of the wall. When she pressed it, she heard a faint click. The panel swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow space behind the wall. And within that space, a small black safe. Samantha stared at the safe for a long moment, her breathing shallow. Her father, methodical, transparent Robert Taylor, had built a secret compartment in his study, had hidden something important enough to require a safe behind a false wall. The combination lock stared back at her, waiting. 9 digits. She tried the obvious first. His birthday, her mother's birthday. Nothing. Social security number. Still nothing. Then, With hands that had begun to tremble, she tried the date her mother died, March 15, 2010. The lock clicked open. Inside, manila folders lay stacked, with the same precision her father had brought to everything else. But the contents. Samantha's world tilted as she pulled out the first document. CIA letterhead. Her father's photograph, but with a different name. Agent William Phoenix. Classification stamps she'd only seen in movies. Her hands shook as she opened the first folder. Surveillance photographs of men she didn't recognize. Financial records detailing offshore accounts. Communications between government officials discussing operations she couldn't begin to understand. And then a single photograph that made her sink into her father's desk chair. Robert Taylor, very much alive, standing outside a coffee shop with a date stamp showing 2 years after his supposed death. The man she'd mourned, whose funeral she'd attended, whose grave she'd visited every year on the anniversary, alive, living somewhere else, under some other identity, while she'd grown up believing herself orphaned. Samantha's methodical lawyer's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Everything she'd believed about her family, her history, her very identity was crumbling with each document she pulled from the safe. Her father hadn't been a humble accountant. Her mother's car accident might not have been an accident at all. And somewhere in these files lay evidence of secrets that someone had been willing to kill to protect. She found herself hyperventilating, the familiar walls of her childhood home suddenly feeling like a trap. The man who taught her to value truth above all else had built his entire life, their entire life, on a lie so fundamental that she wasn't sure who she really was anymore. But even as panic clawed at her chest, another part of her mind, the part trained to examine evidence, to build cases, to seek justice, began to surface. These documents weren't random. They'd been carefully curated, deliberately preserved, hidden where only someone who knew Robert Taylor's methodical nature would think to look. This wasn't just a secret, it was a message, a trail of breadcrumbs left by a dead man who'd apparently died twice. Samantha gathered the files, her hands steadier now despite the earthquake in her chest. Whatever her father had been involved in, whatever forces had shaped her family's destruction, the answers were here in this room. And despite every instinct screaming at her to run, to burn the evidence and pretend she'd never found it, she knew she was going to follow this path wherever it led. Even if it destroyed everything she thought she knew about the people she'd loved. Outside, a car door slammed shut with unnecessary force. Through the study's window, Samantha glimpsed a dark sedan parked across the street, one that hadn't been there when she'd arrived. The driver remained inside, a shadow behind tinted glass, but she could feel attention focused on the house like a weight against her skin. Watching. Waiting. The game, whatever it was, had already begun. Samantha's hands trembled as she carried the files to her father's desk, the weight of the documents seeming to multiply with each step. The dark sedan remained parked across the street, its presence now feeling less like coincidence and more like surveillance. She pulled the curtains closed and switched on the desk lamp, creating a small circle of light in the growing darkness. The first audio recording sat in an unmarked envelope, a simple cassette tape that looked decades old. Her father's ancient tape player still sat on the bookshelf. He'd been resistant to technology, preferring the reliability of analog systems. With fingers that felt disconnected from her body, she inserted the tape and pressed play. Her father's voice filled the room, familiar yet strange. The warm tone she remembered from bedtime stories was gone, replaced by something harder, more clinical. "If you're hearing this, Samantha, then I'm truly dead this time. And you've found what I hoped you'd never have to find." She sank into his chair, the leather creaking in protest. Even from beyond the grave, Robert Taylor's presence dominated this space. My real name, is Agent William Phoenix. I've been dead to the CIA for 13 years now, though they've spent considerable resources trying to make that death permanent. A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Your mother discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. And when she refused to stay quiet, they killed her. The tape continued, but Samantha's world had narrowed to those few words. They killed her. The car accident that had destroyed her family, that had left her motherless at 13, murder disguised as tragedy. The brake lines were cut professionally, made to look like mechanical failure. I have the photographs, the forensic evidence that was buried. Webb, Director Harrison Webb, gave the order personally. Your mother was getting too close to Operation Blackwater. Samantha forced herself to breathe, to focus on her father's words, even as rage built in her chest like a living thing. I discovered the conspiracy by accident. Financial irregularities and black budget operations. Money being funneled to private contractors for work that violated every constitutional principle this country was founded on. When I tried to report it through proper channels, I learned the corruption went all the way to the top. She opened the first file folder, finding bank statements and wire transfer records. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies, funding operations with code names that sounded like something from a thriller novel. But the dates, the amounts, the meticulous documentation, this was real. I faked my death because it was the only way to protect you and keep investigating. Webb's people were closing in, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate my family to silence me. So Robert Taylor died in that warehouse fire, and William Phoenix went underground. A photograph slipped from between the pages. Her father, very much alive, standing outside what looked like a safe house in some anonymous suburban neighborhood. The date stamp showed it was taken just 6 months ago. For 13 years, I've been gathering evidence, building an unassailable case against Webb and his network. Every murder they've committed, every law they've broken, every constitutional right they've trampled, it's all documented here. Samantha's legal mind began to engage despite her emotional turmoil. This wasn't just a collection of random documents. It was a carefully constructed case file, the kind that could bring down governments if properly presented. But I'm dying, Sam. Really dying this time. The cancer they don't know about, the one that will take me before they can. So this burden falls to you now. She found medical records confirming it, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 8 months ago. Her father had known he was living on borrowed time when he'd compiled these files. You have a choice to make. You can destroy all of this, walk away, live the quiet life you've built. Webb doesn't know about you yet. You could stay safe. The tape crackled with static, and when her father's voice returned, it carried a weight of regret that made her chest ache. Or you can finish what your mother started, what I've spent 13 years building toward. But understand, if you choose this path, there's no going back. They will come for you. They will try to discredit you, destroy you, kill you if necessary. Webb has resources you can't imagine. More photographs spilled across the desk. Surveillance shots of her apartment building, her law office, her favorite coffee shop. Someone had been watching her for years, documenting her routines, her habits, her vulnerabilities. If you decide to fight, you won't be alone. I've left instructions on how to contact allies, people who've been waiting for this moment. But the final decision has to be yours, and you need to make it quickly. My death will trigger protocols. They'll be coming. The recording ended with a click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Samantha sat motionless, surrounded by evidence of a shadow war that had been raging around her entire adult life. Her parents hadn't been victims of random tragedy. They'd been casualties in a battle between those who believed in accountability and those who preferred the darkness. She thought about her carefully ordered life, the law practice she'd built brick by brick, the small circle of professional acquaintances she'd kept at arm's length, the apartment that was more fortress than home. All of it designed to keep the chaos at bay, to maintain control in a world that had shown her how quickly everything could be taken away. But now she understood that her control had always been an illusion. The same forces that had killed her mother, that had forced her father into hiding, had been shaping her life from the shadows. Every choice she'd made, every path she'd taken, had been influenced by a conspiracy she hadn't even known existed. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. She'd spent 15 years running from the truth, building walls to keep out pain that had already found her. Her mother had died trying to expose corruption, and her father had sacrificed everything to continue that fight. Samantha began organizing the files with the methodical precision that had made her a successful lawyer. Evidence of financial crimes here, documentation of murders there, a careful timeline of corruption that stretched back decades. This wasn't just her father's legacy, it was her inheritance in the truest sense. Outside, a car engine started. Through a gap in the curtains, she watched the sedan pull away, but she knew it would be replaced soon enough. The watchers were repositioning, preparing for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Package retrieved. Interested parties have been notified. You have 48 hours. The countdown had begun. The text message vanished from Samantha's phone screen as if it had never existed, leaving behind only the timestamp and her growing certainty that 48 hours might be optimistic. She gathered the most critical documents, her legal training automatically prioritizing evidence by importance and portability. Bank records, communication transcripts, and her father's detailed operational notes went into her briefcase. The rest she photographed with methodical precision, uploading copies to 3 separate cloud accounts. Outside, the suburban street had taken on an ominous quality. The same houses she'd known since childhood now felt like potential observation posts, their darkened windows possibly concealing watchers. Every parked car seemed suspicious, every shadow a potential threat. She was sealing the safe when she heard it, the almost imperceptible sound of a shoe scuffing against concrete. Then another, multiple footsteps, coordinated, professional, moving with the kind of careful precision that suggested military or intelligence training. Samantha's pulse spiked as she remembered her father's recorded words about escape routes and defensive measures. Without fully understanding why, she found herself checking the study's windows, noting sight lines and potential exits. The logical part of her mind insisted this was paranoia, but a deeper instinct, something that felt inherited, was already calculating distances and angles. The front door's lock turned with the same stubborn resistance it always had, but now, the sound carried menace. Footsteps in the entryway. Multiple sets, moving with practiced stealth through her childhood home. Clear the ground floor first. A woman's voice commanded, low but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She's here somewhere. Vehicles still in the driveway. Samantha's hands moved without conscious direction, closing the hidden panel and grabbing her briefcase. The study had a second door, one that connected to the kitchen through what had once been a butler's pantry. She'd forgotten about it until this moment, but her feet were already carrying her toward it. The pantry was narrow and dark, filled with the accumulated debris of decades. But it opened into the kitchen, and from there she could reach the back door. Simple. Logical. Except as she eased the pantry door open, she could see a figure moving past the kitchen window, someone positioned to watch the rear exit. Trapped. The word echoed in her mind as she heard footsteps approaching the study. Professional, methodical, thorough. These weren't burglars or random intruders. These were the people her father had spent 13 years hiding from. Agent Martinez. A male voice called from the living room. You need to see this. The study door opened behind her. Empty, the woman, Martinez said, but she was here recently. Coffee cup still warm. Samantha pressed herself against the pantry wall, hardly daring to breathe. Through the crack in the door, she could see into the study where a tall woman with graying hair was examining the desk. Professional bearing, moves like someone comfortable with violence, eyes that missed nothing. This was Agent Sarah Martinez, and she was exactly what Samantha had expected and feared. Forensics will want to process this room, Martinez continued. If Phoenix left anything behind, she would have found it here. Phoenix, her father's operational name, spoken like these people had known him personally. The casual familiarity in Martinez's voice carried undertones of respect and regret that confused Samantha's assumptions about enemies and allies. Ma'am. Another voice called from upstairs. Bedroom's been searched. Someone went through everything systematically. This wasn't random. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Martinez nodded, then did something unexpected. She approached the wall where the hidden panel was concealed, her fingers tracing the same path Samantha had followed hours earlier. When she pressed the concealed molding, the panel swung open with the same quiet click. "Son of a bitch," Martinez breathed, staring into the empty safe. He actually did it. After all these years. The admiration in her voice was unmistakable. Whatever relationship Martinez had had with Samantha's father, it wasn't simple antagonism. But that didn't make her less dangerous. "She has everything," Martinez said into her radio. "Phoenix's insurance policy is active. Alert the director. We have a Code 7 situation." Code 7. Samantha didn't know what that meant, but the tension in Martinez's voice suggested it wasn't good for anyone involved. "Ma'am," the voice from upstairs called again. "We found something else. Surveillance photos of the daughter. Recent ones. Someone's been watching her for months. The photographs." Samantha remembered them scattered across the desk upstairs, evidence that she'd been under observation long before tonight. But Martinez's reaction was unexpected. Instead of satisfaction, her expression darkened with what looked like anger. "Bag everything," Martinez ordered. "And get me a location on Samantha Taylor." She couldn't have gone far. That was Samantha's cue to move. The pantry had a second exit, one that led to the basement stairs. From there, she could reach the cellar's exterior door, an escape route her father had probably planned decades ago. But as she shifted her weight, the old floorboard beneath her feet created the smallest sound. Martinez's head snapped toward the pantry. Their eyes met through the crack in the door, and for a frozen moment, Samantha saw recognition, calculation, and something that might have been respect flash across the agent's face. "Contact," Martinez called to her team, but her voice lacked urgency, almost as if she was giving Samantha time to run. Samantha didn't waste the opportunity. She bolted through the pantry, down the basement stairs, her briefcase clutched against her chest like armor. Behind her, she heard Martinez's measured footsteps, following, but not pursuing with the intensity she'd expected. The basement door stuck, swollen with years of humidity, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. It opened into the backyard, into darkness that suddenly felt like salvation. As she reached her car, Samantha caught a glimpse of Martinez standing in the basement doorway, watching her escape with an expression that defied easy interpretation. Not the look of a hunter who'd lost her prey, but something more complex, almost like she was relieved. The engine started on the first try, and Samantha pulled away from her childhood home, knowing she could never return. In her rearview mirror, she saw Martinez speaking into her radio, her words lost but her body language, suggesting she was reporting a successful escape rather than a failure to capture. Whatever game was being played here, the rules were more complicated than simple pursuit and evasion. And somehow, Samantha suspected that Agent Sarah Martinez was playing by different rules than her superiors expected. Samantha drove through the night with no destination, her father's briefcase on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. Every set of headlights in her rearview mirror could be surveillance, every traffic light a potential trap. The methodical lawyer who had arrived at her childhood home that morning was gone, replaced by someone operating on instincts she didn't know she possessed. 3 hours and 200 miles later, she pulled into a 24-hour diner outside Bakersfield, choosing a booth with clear sight lines to both entrances. The coffee was terrible, but it gave her shaking hands something to hold while she processed what had happened. Agent Martinez could have arrested her, could have called for backup when their eyes met in the pantry. Instead, she'd let her escape. Why? The question gnawed at her as she opened her father's files again, searching for clues about allies he'd mentioned. Most of the names meant nothing to her, but one designation appeared repeatedly in the margins: Ghost LA payment due. Her father had been meticulous about debts, both financial and personal. If someone owed him, or if he owed them, it would be documented. But payment due suggested this ghost person was waiting for something from Robert Taylor, something that might now fall to his daughter. At 3 a.m., Samantha found herself in downtown Los Angeles, following digital breadcrumbs her father had left in coded messages buried within seemingly mundane accounting files. The trail led to a warehouse district where legitimate businesses gave way to the kind of establishments that didn't advertise their services. The address belonged to a computer repair shop wedged between a closed tattoo parlor and a laundromat that looked like it hadn't seen customers in years. But the repair shop's lights were on, and through the dusty window, she could see someone working at a bank of monitors that belonged in a government facility, not a neighborhood electronics store. She knocked, and the work stopped immediately. Footsteps approached the door, but it didn't open. "We're closed," a male voice called through the steel. "I'm looking for Ghost," Samantha replied, feeling foolish. "Robert Taylor sent me." Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then locks turned, multiple locks, serious security that suggested whoever was inside had reason to be careful about visitors. The man who opened the door was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of lean build that came from nervous energy rather than gym workouts. His dark hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked like he'd been wearing them for days. But his eyes were sharp, constantly moving, taking in details about her and the street behind her with professional thoroughness. "Robert Taylor's been dead for 15 years, he said carefully. "That's what I thought too, until this morning." Samantha held up a photograph, one of her father taken just months ago. "Apparently, we were both wrong." Ghost, she assumed this was him, studied the photograph for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her enter. The shop's interior bore no resemblance to its modest storefront. Banks of servers hummed in climate-controlled cases. Multiple screens displayed scrolling data feeds, and the air buzzed with the kind of electromagnetic energy that came from serious computing power. "Marcus Rivera," he said, finally offering his real name. "And yeah, your father saved my life once. Been waiting for him to collect on that debt for 8 years." He led her past the electronics to a small office in the back, its walls covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and flowcharts that looked like conspiracy theories made manifest. But as Samantha examined them more closely, she recognized names and dates from her father's files. This wasn't paranoid speculation, it was a systematic investigation. "Military intelligence," Marcus explained, following her gaze. "Until my unit got burned by our own people. Phoenix pulled me out of a black site in Afghanistan when the brass decided I knew too much about our operations in Syria." He poured coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing for hours, then settled behind a desk covered with hard drives and encrypted communication devices. "So what did the old man leave you?" Samantha opened her briefcase, spreading documents across his desk. Marcus's expression grew increasingly serious as he examined bank records, classified communications, and evidence of systematic corruption spanning decades. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, holding up a photograph of Director Webb shaking hands with a man Samantha didn't recognize. He actually got proof of the Blackwater connection. "You know about Operation Blackwater?" "Know about it. I helped run logistics for 3 missions before I figured out what we were really doing." Marcus's voice carried the weight of old guilt. "Assassinations disguised as foreign terrorist attacks. American citizens eliminated for asking the wrong questions. Your mother wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last." The revelation hit Samantha like a physical blow. Her mother's death hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a systematic elimination of threats to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. "Webb's been cleaning house for 20 years, Marcus continued. "Anyone who gets too close to the truth ends up dead or discredited. The fact that your father survived this long is a miracle." He was already moving, pulling equipment from various drawers and cabinets. Encrypted phones, portable hard drives, identification documents that looked professionally forged. "If you've got Phoenix's files, they'll be coming for you with everything they have. Webb can't afford to let this evidence reach the public." As if summoned by his words, Marcus's monitoring systems began chiming with alerts. He rushed to his main console, fingers flying across multiple keyboards as data streamed across his screens. "Shit," he muttered. "Federal task force just got activated. Multiple agencies. Priority 1 manhunt? They're not messing around." Samantha felt the walls closing in again, the same trapped sensation she'd experienced in her father's study. But this time, she wasn't alone. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Someone else has been making inquiries about Phoenix's files. CIA internal investigation, but off the books." Agent named Martinez. The name sent a chill through Samantha. I met her tonight. She could have arrested me, but she didn't. Marcus paused in his preparations, studying Samantha's face. Martinez was Phoenix's partner before he went underground. If she's investigating internally, it might mean she's finally ready to admit he was right about the conspiracy. He handed her a secure phone and a small device that looked like a GPS tracker. This will let us communicate without anyone listening in. And this, he held up the tracker, will tell me if you're in trouble. But I need to ask. Are you sure you want to do this? Your father spent 13 years running from these people. You could disappear, start over somewhere they'll never find you. Samantha thought about her carefully constructed life, the emotional walls she'd built to keep chaos at bay. Then she thought about her mother, murdered for asking questions. Her father, forced to fake his death and abandon his daughter to pursue justice. They've been making choices about my life since I was 13, she said. It's time I made some of my own. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Then we need to move fast. Because if Martinez is really ready to turn against Webb, she's gonna need proof, and right now, you're the only person who has it. As they prepared to leave the shop, Samantha caught Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like admiration. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. But he'd also be terrified. What we're about to do, there's no going back from this. Samantha hefted her briefcase, feeling the weight of evidence that could bring down a government conspiracy. Then let's make sure we do it right. The call came at 6:47 a.m., jarring Samantha awake in the anonymous motel room Marcus had secured for her 20 miles outside the city. The encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message that made her blood freeze. A photograph of her Aunt Eleanor, bound to a chair in what looked like a basement, terror etched across her weathered face. The accompanying text was brief and clinical. You have something that belongs to us. Make this easy, and the old woman lives to see tomorrow. Samantha's hands shook as she forwarded the image to Marcus, her mind reeling with the implications. Eleanor Taylor had raised her, protected her, given her stability when her world collapsed. Now she was paying the price for secrets she'd never chosen to keep. The secure phone rang within minutes. I'm tracing the metadata. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. But Sam, you need to know, this isn't random. They've been watching your aunt for years, probably since your father's supposed death. Samantha sank onto the motel bed, the weight of realization crushing her chest. She knew. Eleanor knew he was alive, didn't she? If she did, she's been living with that burden for 15 years. Keeping his secret, protecting you from the truth. Marcus paused. There's something else. I've been monitoring CIA communications, and Agent Martinez has been asking questions about unauthorized operations. She's trying to build a case from the inside. Can we trust her? That's what we need to find out. Because right now, she might be the only ally we have inside the system. An hour later, Samantha sat across from Agent Sarah Martinez in a coffee shop that Marcus had swept for surveillance. The older woman looked exhausted, her professional composure cracked by whatever internal battle she was fighting. Your father was the most ethical agent I ever worked with, Martinez said without preamble. When he started questioning Operation Blackwater, I should have listened. Instead, I followed orders and helped them discredit him. She pulled out a tablet, showing Samantha classified files that detailed a systematic campaign to eliminate threats to national security, broadly defined to include journalists, activists, and government employees who asked inconvenient questions. Webb convinced us we were protecting democracy by eliminating its enemies. It took me 15 years to realize we'd become the enemy. Martinez's voice carried the weight of profound regret. Your mother was investigating defense contractor fraud. Nothing that should have been classified, but it connected to Blackwater funding. Webb ordered the hit personally. Samantha felt rage building in her chest, pure and crystalline. And Eleanor? What's her crime? She's leverage. Webb knows you won't run while she's in danger. He's counting on your emotional attachment to force a trade. The evidence for your aunt's life. Martinez slid a photograph across the table, a satellite image of a compound in the mountains east of Los Angeles. Black site facility. Officially doesn't exist. That's where they're holding her. Then we get her out, Samantha said simply. We? Martinez's eyebrows rose. You're a lawyer, not an operative. This isn't a legal brief you can argue in court. No, it's family. And I won't let them hurt another person I love. The determination in her own voice surprised Samantha. 3 days ago, she'd been a cautious estate attorney who avoided emotional risks. Now she was planning to assault a CIA black site to rescue the woman who'd raised her. The transformation felt both terrifying and inevitable. Martinez studied her for a long moment. You sound like your father. That same stubborn refusal to accept injustice. She closed the tablet. If we do this, I'm finished at the agency. There's no coming back from helping you. Are you sure that's a bad thing? A ghost of a smile crossed Martinez's face. Phoenix asked me the same question once. I wasn't ready to hear the answer then. They spent the next 2 hours planning, with Marcus providing technical expertise via encrypted communication. The facility had minimal external security. Its protection came from secrecy, not fortification. But getting Eleanor out would require precise timing and inside knowledge that only Martinez possessed. There's a shift change at 11 p.m., she explained. Skeleton crew for 4 hours while the night team settles in. If we move then, we might get in and out before anyone realizes what happened. Samantha reviewed the building layouts, memorizing routes and contingencies with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to legal briefs. But beneath the planning, fear gnawed at her. Not for herself. She'd already accepted that risk. But for Eleanor, who'd been pulled into this nightmare through no choice of her own. There's something you need to understand, Martinez said as they prepared to leave. Webb didn't just order your mother's death and your father's elimination. He's been orchestrating a systematic dismantling of government oversight for 2 decades. The evidence in your briefcase represents the only comprehensive record of his operations. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If we succeed tonight, if we get Eleanor out and the evidence to the right people, it won't just bring down Webb. It'll expose corruption that reaches into Congress, the Pentagon, possibly the White House itself. Samantha thought about her quiet life, her careful routines, the emotional walls she'd built to keep pain at bay. All of it felt like a different person's existence now. My mother died for asking questions. My father sacrificed everything to find answers. Eleanor's been living in fear for 15 years. She met Martinez's gaze steadily. I won't let their suffering be meaningless. As they left the coffee shop separately, Samantha caught sight of her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the cautious lawyer who'd driven to her father's house 3 days ago. This person had harder eyes, a straighter spine, the bearing of someone who'd found a purpose worth dying for. Her phone buzzed with another message from Webb's people. Midnight. Pier 19. Come alone, or she dies screaming. Samantha deleted the message without responding. They wanted to trade Eleanor for the evidence, but they'd made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed she was still the frightened girl who'd lost her parents, someone who could be controlled through fear and emotional manipulation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In 8 hours, Samantha Taylor was going to war, and unlike her parents, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The black site facility crouched against the mountainside like a concrete cancer, its unmarked walls betraying no hint of the secrets contained within. Samantha lay prone beside Sarah Martinez on a ridge overlooking the compound, night vision binoculars revealing the sparse exterior security that relied on invisibility rather than fortification. 2 guards at the main entrance, 1 roving patrol. Martinez whispered into her comm unit. Marcus, are you reading their communications? Crystal clear, came the reply through their earpieces. Internal cameras are on a 12-minute rotation cycle. I can give you a 4-minute window when the corridor to holding cells will be blind. Samantha's pulse hammered against her throat as she studied the building where Eleanor was being held. 3 days ago, the most dangerous thing in her life had been a difficult client. Now she was preparing to infiltrate a CIA black site with a rogue agent and a military hacker who operated from the shadows. "Remember," Martinez said, checking her sidearm one final time, "once we go in, there's no backing down. I'll be burning every bridge I have left in the intelligence community." "Are you sure about this?" Samantha asked, though she knew the answer. Martinez had made her choice the moment she'd decided to help rather than arrest. "Your father asked me the same question 15 years ago, when he tried to expose Blackwater. I chose loyalty to the institution over loyalty to the truth." Martinez's voice carried decades of regret. "I won't make that mistake again." They moved down the ridge with practiced stealth, Martinez's training evident in every calculated step. Samantha found herself matching the agent's rhythm, her body somehow understanding movement patterns she'd never consciously learned. Another inheritance from her father, perhaps muscle memory passed down through genetics and desperation. Marcus's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Patrol just past the south entrance. You have 8 minutes before he circles back." The security lock yielded to Martinez's access codes, credentials that wouldn't be valid much longer once their infiltration was discovered. Inside, the facility's sterile corridors stretched in multiple directions, lit by harsh fluorescent lighting that turned everything the color of old bones. "Holding cells are in the basement," Martinez whispered, leading them toward a stairwell marked with warnings about authorized personnel only. "But Sam, you need to know. Eleanor isn't the only person they're holding down there." They descended 2 levels, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The basement corridor was lined with heavy doors, each marked only with numbers. No names, no indication of who might be imprisoned behind the steel barriers. "Cell 7, Martinez said, producing a keycard from her jacket. "But first, there's someone else you need to see." She led Samantha to cell 12, where the locks disengaged with an electronic chirp. Inside, a man in his 50s sat on a narrow cot, his once neat appearance disheveled by weeks of captivity. When he looked up, Samantha saw intelligence in his eyes, but also a kind of broken desperation that spoke to months of psychological pressure. "Dr. James Morrison," Martinez said quietly, "the scientist whose research they weaponized." Morrison's gaze fixed on Samantha with startling intensity. "You're Robert Taylor's daughter," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You have his eyes, and his stubborn refusal to let sleeping dogs lie. You knew my father. We never met, but his investigation into Blackwater funding traced back to my research grants. Technology I developed to help people, nano-surveillance devices for medical monitoring. They perverted it into assassination tools." His hands shook as he spoke. "Untraceable, undetectable methods of eliminating targets that made your mother's death possible." The revelation hit Samantha like a physical blow. This man's work, twisted by Webb's people, had provided the technology that killed her mother. But looking at his haunted expression, she saw only another victim of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. "We're getting you both out of here," she said simply. Morrison shook his head. "They'll never stop hunting me. What I know, what I've seen them do with my research, they can't afford to let me live." "Then we make sure your testimony reaches people who can act on it," Samantha replied. "Help me finish what my parents started." They found Eleanor in cell 7, bound but unharmed, her eyes widening with relief and confusion when she saw Samantha. "What are you doing here?" she whispered as Martinez cut her restraints. "This is too dangerous. You should have stayed away." "I'm done staying away from dangerous truths," Samantha replied, helping her aunt to her feet. "It's time this family stopped running from what we're afraid to face." Eleanor's expression shifted, recognizing something new in her niece's voice. The frightened girl who'd lost her parents was gone, replaced by someone who'd found the courage to fight back. Marcus's voice crackled urgently through their earpieces. "Company incoming. 3 vehicles, full tactical teams. You've got maybe 10 minutes before they lock the place down." The escape route Martinez had planned, back through the main entrance, was now compromised. But the agent was already moving. leading them deeper into the facility rather than toward the exits. Emergency evacuation tunnel, she explained, pulling them down a maintenance corridor that wasn't on any official blueprints. Your father helped design the security systems for some of these facilities. He made sure there were always alternatives. Even in death, Robert Taylor was still protecting his daughter. The tunnel emerged half a mile from the facility, hidden behind a false rock outcropping that blended seamlessly with the mountainside. As they climbed toward Marcus's extraction point, Samantha heard the distant sound of helicopters and knew Webb's forces were mobilizing for a manhunt that would span states. There's no going back now, Martinez said as they reached Marcus's waiting vehicle. For any of us. Samantha looked back at the facility where she'd been held, then at Eleanor and Dr. Morrison, 2 more lives caught in the web of conspiracy that had shaped her existence. The evidence in her briefcase was no longer just about justice for her parents. It was about stopping a system that treated human lives as acceptable casualties in the pursuit of power. Good, she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I'm tired of going back. It's time to move forward. As they drove through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Samantha realized she'd crossed a threshold tonight. She was no longer Robert Taylor's daughter, or Eleanor's niece, or even Samantha the lawyer. She was someone new, someone willing to risk everything to ensure that the truth finally saw daylight. Behind them, searchlights swept the mountainside, hunting for prey that was already beyond their reach. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since opening her father's safe, Samantha felt like they might actually have a chance to win. Dr. James Morrison sat hunched in the corner of Marcus's safe house, his hands trembling as he clutched a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The rescue from the black site facility had left him physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, his brilliant mind fracturing under the weight of guilt he'd carried for over a decade. Samantha watched him carefully, recognizing the signs of deep trauma that no amount of medical training could heal. Eleanor was resting in the next room, finally safe but still processing her own ordeal. The successful rescue had come at a cost. Sarah Martinez was now officially a fugitive, and Webb's forces were mobilizing for a final confrontation. Tell me about your research, Samantha said gently, settling into a chair across from Morrison. Help me understand what they did with your work. Morrison's eyes darted to her face, then away, as if making eye contact was physically painful. Nano-surveillance technology, he whispered. Microscopic devices designed to monitor cardiac patients, track medication compliance. Revolutionary medical applications that could have saved thousands of lives. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about the science, the academic foundation providing stability amid his emotional chaos. Self-assembling nanomachines that could integrate with human tissue, monitor vital signs, even deliver targeted drug therapies. The Defense Department funded my research through a medical grant program. When did you realize they had other plans for it? Morrison's composure cracked again. 2 years into the project. They wanted modifications, delivery systems that didn't require medical procedures, tracking capabilities that went far beyond health monitoring. I thought they were interested in battlefield medicine for soldiers. Martinez appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Show her the files, doctor. She needs to understand exactly what we're fighting. With shaking hands, Morrison opened a laptop that Marcus had provided, accessing encrypted files he'd managed to hide before his capture. The screen filled with technical specifications that made Samantha's lawyer-trained mind struggle to comprehend the implications. They turned my healing technology into assassination tools, Morrison continued, his voice breaking. Nano devices that could be introduced through food, water, even skin contact. Once in the bloodstream, they could trigger heart attacks, strokes, organ failure, all appearing completely natural. Samantha felt ice spreading through her veins. My mother's car accident? The brake lines were cut, but that was just the beginning. They used my nano devices to ensure she couldn't survive the crash. Microscopic machines that prevented blood clotting, guaranteed that minor injuries became fatal. Morrison's face was pale with remembered horror. I watched the surveillance footage of her death, watched my technology kill an innocent woman. The room fell silent, except for the hum of Marcus's electronic equipment. Samantha processed the revelation that her mother's murder had been even more calculated, more technologically sophisticated than she'd imagined. Webb's people hadn't just cut brake lines. They'd turned Dr. Morrison's life-saving research into a perfect murder weapon. "How many others?" she asked quietly. "Hundreds. Journalists, whistleblowers, government employees who asked too many questions. All eliminated using technology that leaves no forensic trace, no evidence of foul play." Morrison pulled up another file, a list of names and dates that stretched back 15 years. "Your mother was among the first, but she wasn't the last." Martinez moved closer, her expression dark with suppressed rage. "Webb has been using Morrison's technology to systematically eliminate threats to his operation. Perfect assassinations that look like natural deaths or accidents." "And you've been carrying this knowledge alone for how long?" Samantha asked Morrison. "Since I realized what they'd done. I tried to destroy my research, tried to disappear, but they found me. Kept me prisoner, forced me to continue development while they used my earlier work for murder." His hands shook more violently. "Every time I refused to cooperate, they showed me footage of another death, another person killed by technology I created to save lives." Samantha reached across the table, covering Morrison's trembling hands with her own. "It's not your fault. You couldn't have known what they would do with your research. But I did know, eventually. And I kept working because I was afraid to die." Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm a coward who chose survival over stopping mass murder." "You're a victim," Samantha corrected firmly, "and now you have a chance to help stop them. But only if you're willing to go public with what you know." Morrison recoiled as if she'd struck him. "Testify? In open court? They'll kill me before I can say a word." "Not if we do this right," Martinez interjected. "Simultaneous releases to multiple news outlets, congressional testimony, international media. Make it impossible for them to silence you." "You don't understand," Morrison said desperately. "Webb's reach extends everywhere. Judges, prosecutors, journalists. They're all compromised or intimidated. Even if I testify, who's going to act on it?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Actually, we might have an answer to that. I've been monitoring Webb's communications, and there's a fracture in his organization. Several high-ranking officials are demanding answers about unauthorized operations. The conspiracy is starting to eat itself." He handed Samantha a tablet showing intercepted messages between government officials expressing concern about Webb's increasingly extreme actions. "Political pressure is building. If we time Morrison's revelation correctly, it could provide the evidence they need to act." Morrison studied the communications, and for the first time since his rescue, Samantha saw hope flicker in his eyes. "If there are people inside the system ready to listen." "There are," Martinez confirmed. "But they need proof they can't ignore. Your testimony, combined with the evidence from Robert's files, could provide that proof." Samantha watched Morrison wrestle with his decision, understanding the terrible burden he carried. His technology had been perverted into an instrument of mass murder, used to kill her mother and countless others. But his guilt, while understandable, was also a luxury they couldn't afford. "Doctor," she said quietly, "my mother died because she asked questions about defense contractor fraud. My father spent 15 years gathering evidence because he believed in justice. Right now, you're the only person who can explain the technical details of how Webb's people committed these murders." Morrison met her gaze, and she saw the brilliant scientist beneath the traumatized prisoner. "If I do this, if I testify publicly, they'll never stop hunting me." "Then we make sure your testimony matters enough to bring them down," Samantha replied. "Help me finish what my parents started." After a long moment, Morrison nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" The coordinated attack began at 3:17 a.m. across 7 locations simultaneously. Webb's tactical teams moved with military precision, hitting every safe house Marcus had established, every bolt hole Martinez had prepared. But their targets were already gone, scattered to predetermined positions across the city like pieces on a chessboard. Samantha crouched in the abandoned subway tunnel beneath downtown Los Angeles, watching Marcus's fingers dance across multiple keyboards as he orchestrated their final gambit. Screens showed news feeds from around the world, dormant for now but ready to explode with information that would bring down a conspiracy decades in the making. Phase 1 is live, Marcus reported through their encrypted network. Morrison's testimony is uploading to 12 major news outlets simultaneously: BBC, Washington Post, New York Times. They'll all have the complete technical specifications within minutes. 3 miles away, Dr. Morrison sat in a television studio that Martinez had secured through contacts who still believed in accountability over institutional loyalty. His hands no longer trembled as he spoke into the camera, his scientific training providing the clarity he needed to explain how his life-saving research had been perverted into assassination technology. Webb's people are jamming local broadcasts. Martinez's voice crackled through the comm. But they can't stop international feeds. The story's already gone global. Director Harrison Webb watched his carefully constructed world crumble from his crisis command center, surrounded by screens showing the very evidence he'd spent 20 years suppressing. His composed facade was fracturing under the weight of exposure he'd never imagined possible. "Shut it down," he ordered his communications chief. "Use emergency protocols. National security override." "Sir, we can't. The releases are coming from too many sources, too many countries, and Congress is already demanding explanations." Webb's phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for the White House. When he answered, the president's voice carried barely controlled fury. "Harrison, I'm watching a scientist explain how you've been using medical technology to assassinate American citizens. Please tell me this is some kind of elaborate misinformation campaign." "Mr. President, I can explain." "You'd better have a damn good explanation, because I've got senators from both parties demanding immediate investigations. The British Prime Minister just called asking if we've been conducting assassination operations on their soil." As Webb struggled to contain the political firestorm, Samantha moved through the tunnel system toward her final destination, the federal courthouse where she would present her father's complete evidence file to a grand jury that Martinez had convinced to convene an emergency session. But Webb wasn't finished. His desperation had reached the point where constitutional niceties no longer mattered. "Deploy Blackwater teams," he ordered his tactical commander. "Full suppression. I don't care about civilian casualties or legal niceties. This ends tonight." The teams that responded weren't official government agents. They were contractors bound by no oversight, no rules of engagement beyond Webb's direct orders. Men who had been conducting illegal operations for so long that the law had become an abstract concept. Marcus detected the deployment through surveillance networks he'd infiltrated. "Sam, you've got multiple teams converging on the courthouse. Military-grade equipment, no legal authority. They're coming to kill everyone involved." Samantha emerged from the tunnel system to find the streets around the federal building crawling with armed men who made no attempt to identify themselves as law enforcement. These weren't arrests. These were executions disguised as tactical operations. "Martinez, where are you?" she called through the comm. "Pinned down 2 blocks east. They hit my position first, but I managed to get Morrison out. He's safe with federal marshals who aren't compromised." Martinez's voice was tight with pain, and Samantha could hear gunfire in the background. The agent who had chosen conscience over career was paying the price for her decision to help expose the truth. "I'm moving to the courthouse," Samantha announced, knowing she was walking into a trap but seeing no alternative. The grand jury was waiting, and the evidence in her briefcase was the final piece needed to complete the case against Webb. She approached the federal building's rear entrance, where emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the plaza. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "If you choose this path, there's no going back. They will come for you." The first gunshot shattered the silence, then another. Samantha ran for the courthouse entrance as Webb's contractors closed in from multiple directions. But other figures emerged from the shadows. Federal agents who had been waiting, summoned by Martinez's allies within the system who were finally ready to act. "FBI!" voices shouted from multiple directions. "Drop your weapons!" The plaza erupted into chaos as two different groups of armed men faced off. The constitutional crisis Webb had created, finally forcing government agencies to choose sides. Some supported Webb's shadow operations, others demanded adherence to the law they'd sworn to uphold. Samantha reached the courthouse doors as bullets flew overhead, diving inside as security guards rushed to secure the building. Behind her, she could hear Webb's contractors being overwhelmed by FBI agents who had finally decided that some orders were too illegal to follow. The grand jury is assembled. A federal marshal told her as they escorted her to the courthouse's secure area. "We've been watching Webb's operations for months, waiting for someone with enough evidence to act." In the jury room, Samantha opened her father's briefcase one final time, spreading documents that represented 15 years of careful investigation across the conference table. Bank records, assassination orders, technical specifications for murder weapons, everything needed to dismantle a conspiracy that had operated in the shadows for decades. As she began her testimony, Samantha realized her father's final gift wasn't just the evidence. It was the example he'd set. The understanding that some truths were worth dying for, and that ordinary people could stand against institutional corruption when they found the courage to act. Outside, Webb's empire was collapsing under the weight of exposure he'd never imagined possible. The carefully maintained fiction of plausible deniability was crumbling, as evidence poured out faster than his damage control teams could contain. The web of lies that had shaped Samantha's entire life was finally unraveling, and for the first time since opening her father's safe, she could see the possibility of justice for her family's suffering. 6 weeks after the courthouse siege, Samantha sat in the witness chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room, facing a panel of senators whose expressions ranged from outrage to barely concealed terror. The ornate chamber was packed with journalists, government officials, and citizens who had traveled from across the country to witness what media outlets were calling the most significant intelligence scandal in American history. Senator Patricia Caldwell, the committee chair, leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent sleepless nights reviewing evidence that challenged everything she thought she knew about her own government. "Ms. Taylor, you've testified that your father, Agent William Phoenix, documented over 300 assassinations conducted using weaponized medical technology. Can you walk us through how this operation was funded and authorized?" Samantha opened the leather portfolio that had become her constant companion, her father's final gift transformed into an instrument of justice. The months since Webb's exposure had been a whirlwind of congressional hearings, FBI interviews, and media appearances that had fundamentally altered not just her life, but the national conversation about government accountability. "Senator, the evidence shows that Director Webb used black budget allocations intended for counterterrorism operations to fund what was essentially a domestic assassination program. Money meant to protect American citizens was instead used to eliminate them when they became inconvenient to certain political and corporate interests." She displayed financial records on the chamber's screens, bank transfers, shell company formations, and payment authorizations that Marcus had helped her organize into a devastating timeline of corruption. The numbers were staggering. Over $2 billion diverted from legitimate operations into Webb's shadow network. The victims weren't terrorists or foreign agents. Samantha continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. They were journalists investigating defense contractor fraud, scientists questioning weapons development, government employees who discovered illegal surveillance programs, and whistleblowers who tried to expose corruption through proper channels. Senator James Morrison, no relation to Dr. Morrison, shook his head in apparent disbelief. "Ms. Taylor, these are extraordinary allegations. You're describing systematic murder conducted by elements of our own intelligence community." "I'm describing documented facts, Senator." Dr. James Morrison's testimony has already established the technical methods used. Agent Martinez has provided operational details from her years working within the system. "And my father's files contain recorded conversations, financial records, and photographic evidence spanning 15 years. The committee had already heard Dr. Morrison's devastating testimony about how his medical research had been weaponized. The brilliant scientist had overcome his trauma enough to provide clear, scientific explanations of how nano-surveillance technology could trigger untraceable deaths. His appearance had been broadcast live, and the technical details had horrified viewers who finally understood how sophisticated the assassination methods had become. Agent Sarah Martinez had testified the previous week, her composed professionalism lending credibility to revelations that might otherwise have seemed like conspiracy theories. Her insider knowledge of CIA operations had provided crucial context for understanding how Webb's network had operated within the broader intelligence community. Martinez's testimony revealed something equally disturbing, Samantha said, pulling up another document. Webb's operation wasn't operating in isolation. It had support from officials in multiple agencies, private contractors with government connections, and elected officials who benefited from having inconvenient problems eliminated. The list of implicated individuals read like a who's who of Washington power brokers. 3 sitting congressmen, 2 federal judges, a Supreme Court clerk, multiple Pentagon officials, and executives from major defense contractors. The scope of the conspiracy had shocked even hardened political observers. Senator Rebecca Hayes, whose own investigation into defense spending had apparently made her a target for Webb's attention, spoke with barely controlled anger. Ms. Taylor, according to the evidence you've provided, I was scheduled for elimination because my subcommittee was getting too close to exposing fraudulent contracts. Is that correct? Yes, Senator. The operational planning documents we recovered show that your death was scheduled to appear as a heart attack during a congressional recess. Dr. Morrison's nano devices were already in production for deployment. The revelation sent a visible shudder through the chamber. These weren't abstract victims. They were people in the room, colleagues who had unknowingly been marked for death by their own government. Chairman Caldwell called for a recess, during which Samantha stepped outside to find Marcus waiting in the corridor. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, his hacking skills now officially employed by congressional investigators, working to uncover the full extent of Webb's network. How are you holding up? He asked, offering her a bottle of water. Better than I expected, Samantha replied honestly. 3 months ago, I was afraid of my own shadow. Now I'm testifying before Congress about government assassination programs. It's strange how much you can change when you stop running from the truth. Their relationship had deepened during the intense weeks of investigation and testimony. Marcus's cynical exterior had gradually revealed someone with profound integrity beneath his wounded idealism. They'd found in each other the possibility of trust after betrayal, connection after isolation. Webb's sentencing is next week, Marcus said quietly. 47 counts including conspiracy to commit murder, violation of constitutional rights, and treason. The prosecution is asking for life without parole. Director Harrison Webb's arrest had been broadcast live as FBI agents led him from his office in handcuffs, his composed facade finally cracking as he realized the scope of his exposure. The man who had orchestrated decades of illegal operations was now facing the justice he denied so many others. But his downfall had created a power vacuum that was still reshaping the intelligence community. 3 CIA directors had resigned, congressional oversight had been dramatically expanded, and entire programs were being dismantled as investigators discovered the extent of illegal operations. There's something else, Marcus continued. Eleanor finished her book. Publisher wants to release it next month. Samantha smiled, thinking of her aunt's transformation from frightened secret keeper to determined truth-teller. Eleanor's memoir, Living with Ghosts, 15 Years of Family Secrets, had become a powerful account of how ordinary people were affected by government conspiracies. The woman who had spent years afraid to speak now had a voice that was reaching millions. When the hearing resumed, Samantha faced questions about the personal cost of her father's choices and her own decision to continue his work. Senator Caldwell's voice was gentler now, recognizing the human tragedy beneath the political scandal. Ms. Taylor, your family paid an enormous price for pursuing this truth. Your mother was murdered, your father was forced to abandon his daughter. You were raised, believing yourself orphaned. Do you believe the outcome justifies that suffering? Samantha considered the question carefully. The months of testimony and investigation had brought justice for her family, but they couldn't restore what had been lost. Her parents were still dead, her childhood still shaped by abandonment and loss. Senator, I can't speak for my parents' choices. They're not here to defend their decisions. But I can speak for mine. When I found that safe in my father's study, I had a choice between comfortable ignorance and dangerous truth. I chose truth because that's what my mother died trying to expose, and what my father spent 15 years gathering evidence to prove. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of senators, journalists, and citizens who had come to witness this reckoning. The suffering my family endured wasn't justified by the outcome. It was caused by the very corruption we're addressing today. My mother didn't have to die. My father didn't have to fake his death and live in hiding. Those tragedies happened because people in positions of power believed they could eliminate inconvenient voices without consequence. The chamber was completely silent now, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. But if our suffering can prevent other families from experiencing what we went through, if it can restore some measure of accountability to our government, then maybe some meaning can be found in our loss. Later that evening, Samantha stood at her father's grave, his real grave, where Robert Taylor had finally been laid to rest with his true identity acknowledged. The headstone now read, Agent William Phoenix/Robert Taylor, Father, Patriot, Truth Teller. Sarah Martinez had come to pay her respects, her career in ruins, but her conscience finally clear. He would be proud of what you've accomplished, she said quietly, and probably terrified by the risks you took to accomplish it. He trained me better than he knew, Samantha replied. All those years of teaching me to value truth, to question authority, to never accept easy answers. He was preparing me for this moment without either of us realizing it. The three of them, Samantha, Marcus, and Martinez, stood in comfortable silence as the sun set over the cemetery. They were survivors of a shadow war that most Americans were only now learning had been fought in their name. But they were also something more, proof that ordinary people could stand against institutional corruption when they found the courage to act. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Webb's network was larger than they'd initially understood, and other conspiracies might be operating in the shadows. But tonight, Samantha felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the solid foundation of truth beneath her feet. Her father's final gift hadn't just been evidence, it had been an example. The understanding that some principles were worth dying for, and that love sometimes required the courage to pursue justice, even when it came at terrible personal cost. As they walked away from the grave, Samantha realized she was no longer Robert Taylor's daughter, or William Phoenix's legacy. She was herself, someone who had looked into the darkness and chosen to bring light, someone who had inherited not just secrets, but the strength to transform them into justice. The web of lies that had shaped her life was finally broken, replaced by relationships built on truth, and the hard-won knowledge that democracy required constant vigilance from those brave enough to question power. Her parents' deaths had meaning now, and their daughter had finally come home. 6 months after Director Webb's conviction, Samantha stood in the glass-walled conference room of the Phoenix Foundation, watching the morning sun paint the downtown skyline in shades of gold and amber. The foundation's offices occupied 3 floors of a building that had once housed a defense contractor, Poetic Justice, that she and Marcus had found deeply satisfying when they signed the lease. The Morrison Fellowship applications are coming in faster than we can process them, said David Chen, the foundation's research director, as he spread files across the conference table. 17 whistleblowers from government agencies, 12 from private contractors, and 43 from academic institutions, all requesting protection and legal support for exposing corruption. Samantha nodded, reviewing the applications with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to estate law. But this work carried a weight and purpose that her corporate practice had never provided. Each file represented someone willing to risk everything for truth, the kind of courage her parents had demonstrated and that she now hoped to protect. Fund them all, she said simply. That's why we exist. The Phoenix Foundation had grown beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first proposed it to congressional leaders during her testimony. Initially conceived as a legal defense fund for whistleblowers, it had evolved into something larger: a comprehensive support system for people willing to expose government and corporate corruption. The foundation provided legal representation, secure housing, financial support, and psychological counseling for individuals whose lives had been destroyed by their decision to speak truth to power. But more than that, it had become a symbol of hope for people trapped in systems that demanded silence in exchange for survival. Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying a tablet displaying security feeds from around the building. His transformation from underground hacker to legitimate cybersecurity expert had been remarkable to witness. The paranoid loner who'd operated from a warehouse had become someone comfortable with public attention and institutional responsibility. "Everything's secure for the memorial service," he reported. "Sarah's already here, and Eleanor just arrived with the publisher. Midia's setting up outside, but we've got clear perimeters established." Today marked the first annual Robert Taylor Memorial Lecture, an event designed to honor not just her father's sacrifice, but all intelligence officers who had chosen conscience over convenience. The keynote speaker was Senator Patricia Caldwell, whose congressional investigation had led to the most comprehensive intelligence reform in decades. "How are you feeling about today?" Marcus asked, his concern evident despite their months of shared public appearances. "Nervous," Samantha admitted. "It still feels strange to have my father's real story told publicly. For so long, his heroism was hidden, denied, erased from official records. Now he's being remembered as he truly was." She'd struggled with the decision to make her father's story public. Part of her wanted to keep his memory private, protected from the political interpretations and public scrutiny that came with becoming a symbol. But ultimately, she'd realized that his example was too important to hide. Eleanor joined them in the conference room. Her appearance dramatically changed from the frightened woman who'd lived with family secrets for 15 years. At 68, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd found her voice and refused to let it be silenced again. "The final chapter came back from the editors," Eleanor said, handing Samantha a bound manuscript. "I wanted you to read it before publication." Living with Ghosts had become more than a memoir. It was a detailed account of how government secrecy affected ordinary families, written with the insight of someone who'd lived through decades of fear and silence. Eleanor's transformation from secret keeper to truth teller had inspired thousands of readers who recognized their own struggles with institutional power in her story. Sarah Martinez entered the room, her appearance professional but relaxed. The former CIA agent had found new purpose as the Foundation's security director, using her insider knowledge to protect the very whistleblowers she'd once hunted. Her journey from loyal operative to principled defender of transparency had been painful but ultimately liberating. "The venue's secure," Sarah reported, "though I have to say, it's surreal to be providing protection for a memorial honoring the man I spent years trying to discredit." "People change," Samantha said simply. "Truth has a way of forcing evolution." Dr. James Morrison arrived with the afternoon's other speakers, former intelligence officers, congressional investigators, and journalists who had helped expose Webb's network. The scientist had emerged from his trauma to become one of the most effective advocates for oversight of government research programs. His technical expertise, combined with his personal experience of how good intentions could be perverted, made him a powerful voice for accountability. "The new oversight protocols are working," Morrison told the group as they reviewed the day's program. 3 research programs have been terminated after ethical review, and 2 others have been restructured with independent monitoring. "It's not perfect, but it's progress." As the memorial service began, Samantha found herself thinking about transformation, not just her own, but the broader changes that had emerged from her family's tragedy. Webb's conviction had triggered reforms that went far beyond punishing individual corruption. Congressional oversight had been strengthened, whistleblower protections had been expanded, and public awareness of intelligence overreach had fundamentally shifted. Senator Caldwell's speech captured the broader significance of what had been accomplished. Robert Taylor's sacrifice, and his daughter's courage in continuing his work, has reminded us that democracy requires active vigilance from citizens willing to question power. The price of freedom is not just eternal vigilance, but the willingness to act when that vigilance reveals corruption. The audience included families of other victims, intelligence officers committed to reform, and ordinary citizens who understood that their democracy was only as strong as their willingness to defend it. Seeing them gathered together, Samantha realized her father's legacy had become something larger than personal justice. It was a movement toward transparency and accountability. During the reception, she was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Agent Jennifer Park, a new CIA recruit who had requested assignment to the Reformed Oversight Division. "Miss Taylor, I wanted to thank you," Park said quietly. "Your testimony convinced me that it's possible to serve your country while maintaining your integrity." The reforms you helped create have given people like me hope that we can work within the system to prevent future abuses. These conversations had become routine. Young professionals in government and private industry who saw the Foundation's work as proof that standing up to corruption was possible. They represented the next generation of public servants, shaped by the knowledge that their predecessors' failures required active correction. As the event wound down, Samantha stood with Marcus on the Foundation's rooftop terrace, watching the sun set over a city that had been transformed by their revelations. The skyline looked the same, but she knew the changes went deeper than surface appearances. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, echoing a question he'd posed months earlier when they'd first discussed making her father's work public. "About exposing the truth?" "Never," Samantha replied. "About the cost?" "Sometimes. I think about the quiet life I could have had, the emotional walls I could have kept in place. But then I remember that my quiet life was built on other people's silence about murder and corruption." She thought about her mother, whose questions about defense contractor fraud had triggered a chain of events that ultimately exposed a vast conspiracy. Angela Taylor's curiosity and integrity had planted seeds that took 15 years to fully flower, but the harvest had finally come. "Your father left you more than evidence," Marcus observed. "He left you an example of what it means to choose principle over comfort." "And you helped me understand that I didn't have to make that choice alone," Samantha replied, taking his hand. Their relationship had deepened through shared purpose and mutual respect, built on a foundation of truth that made genuine intimacy possible. Eleanor joined them on the terrace, carrying 3 glasses of wine and wearing an expression of contentment that Samantha hadn't seen since childhood. "To Robert Taylor," Eleanor said, raising her glass, "who taught us that love sometimes requires the courage to pursue justice, even when it comes at terrible personal cost." "To Phoenix," Marcus added, "who proved that some truths are worth dying for." "To second chances," Samantha concluded, "and to the understanding that we can't change the past, but we can shape the future." As they stood together watching the city lights emerge in the gathering darkness, Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The frightened girl who'd lost her parents had become someone willing to risk everything for truth. The careful lawyer who'd avoided emotional risks had learned to trust and love deeply. The grieving daughter who'd felt abandoned by secrets had discovered that some secrets were worth keeping, and others were worth exposing regardless of the cost. Her father's final gift hadn't been just evidence of corruption. It had been an invitation to courage. The chance to transform personal tragedy into public good, private pain into shared healing. She'd inherited not just his secrets but his strength, his integrity, and his understanding that democracy required active participation from citizens willing to confront uncomfortable truths. The Phoenix Foundation would continue its work, protecting whistleblowers and exposing corruption, carrying forward the legacy of a man who'd sacrificed everything for principles larger than himself. But more than that, it represented proof that ordinary people could stand against institutional power when they found the courage to act together. Her parents' deaths finally had meaning, their sacrifices had yielded justice, and their daughter had learned to transform grief into purpose. The web of lies that had shaped her life was broken forever, replaced by relationships built on truth and the hard-won knowledge that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost. Phoenix had risen from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and clearer than before, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with the confidence that came from having walked through fire and emerged transformed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,